Hello everyone, I am here to guide you through the shadows tonight. Before we begin this descent into mystery, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Get comfortable, dim the lights, and allow your breath to settle. What you're about to hear is not just a story, it's an invitation into a place where reality distorts, and reflections remember more than we do. The Whitmore Hotel announced itself with the scent of old wood and forgotten time. Its entrance, an arch of dark brass and frosted glass, creaked open like a throat reluctantly speaking an old name. My footsteps echoed against the marble floor, each strike like a memory being summoned. This wasn't just a hotel. It was a mausoleum of stories too heavy to fade. I was in town for the Morrison account, 3 nights, 1 pitch, nothing extraordinary. My company always booked historic hotels, chasing charm and tax write-offs. But this place didn't feel curated. It felt preserved. Like something had refused to die here. The chandelier overhead, vast and crystalline, hung like a tangle of glass veins. Its fractured light danced on the burgundy wallpaper, patterns winding like roots into the plaster. When I looked directly, they were ornate vines. When I glanced away, they squirmed. The clerk at the front desk greeted me with a practiced smile, but his eyes lingered too long, like he was memorizing my face. As if I was expected. My room was on the 8th floor, room 847. I took the elevator, its brass gates closing with a hollow finality. The ride was silent except for the groan of old machinery pulling me somewhere I wasn't sure I wanted to go. I watched the numbers change. Slowly. Too slowly. The corridor outside room 847 was lined with oil paintings. Men in Victorian attire, all unsmiling, eyes dark and alive with judgment. They followed me. I turned away. I turned back. Their gaze was constant. I unlocked the door. It opened with a sigh. Inside, burgundy carpet, heavy mahogany furniture, and curtains the color of dried blood. The room was pristine but smelled faintly of mildew, as if untouched for years despite its apparent cleanliness. Time seemed arrested here. Thick and unmoving. A mirror dominated the far wall, floor to ceiling, rimmed with silver filigree. It reflected everything with unnatural clarity. My rumpled suit. My tired eyes. The exhaustion carved into my shoulders. I stared longer than I should have. Something in that reflection didn't want me to look away. The first night passed. Uneventful, mostly. Phone calls, presentations, sleep. Or something close to it. The sheets were soft, but dreams pulled taut like wires. I don't remember the details, only a pressure on my chest and a whisper behind my eyes. The next evening, I adjusted my tie in the mirror and saw him. A man in black. Tall. Hollow-eyed. Standing behind me. I turned. Nothing. The room was still. My heart wasn't. It hammered in protest, trying to alert a body too slow to understand. I turned back to the mirror. He was gone. Fatigue, I told myself. It had to be. Shadows and reflections playing tricks. But later, in the bathroom, toothbrush foaming, I saw him again. This time, he wasn't looking at me. He was inspecting something in his hands, something I couldn't see clearly. When I turned, the doorway was empty. Sleep avoided me. The walls groaned. Pipes whispered lullabies in forgotten tongues. The ceiling molding shifted in patterns that weren't there when the lights were on. I started to wonder if the building itself was alive. Or worse, aware. The third day, I buried myself in work. Quarterly numbers. Graphs. Pitches. But the mirror followed me. Even in a boardroom of glass and steel, I saw its glint in every screen reflection. Waiting. That night, I set up my phone to record. I needed proof. If I was losing my mind, I wanted a map of how. I angled the camera to capture both myself and the mirror's reflection, then pressed record. What I saw through the phone's screen made my blood crystallize in my veins. In the live camera feed, my reflection stood alone in the mirror, exactly as it should. But overlaid on this normal image, like a double exposure from old photography, was another scene entirely. The figure was there again, but this time I could see what held its attention. Photographs. Dozens of them scattered across what appeared to be the same writing desk behind me. Though when I glanced over my shoulder, the desk remained clear of everything except the hotel's complimentary stationery. I ended the recording with trembling fingers and immediately played it back. The playback showed only my normal reflection. Nothing more. No figure, no photographs, no impossible double exposure. Just me standing alone in an antique hotel room looking increasingly haggard. The contradiction between what I'd seen in real time and what the recording captured felt like a violation of basic reality. Technology was supposed to be objective, impartial. It recorded what existed, nothing more. Yet somehow, the mirror was showing my phone's camera things that weren't there, things that didn't translate to the digital record. I called the front desk, asking about the hotel's history. The night clerk's voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to unusual requests from guests. The Whitmore, he explained, had stood for nearly a century. It had housed travelers, businessmen, and the occasional artist seeking inspiration in its old-world atmosphere. Some guests, he mentioned with careful neutrality, reported unusual experiences. Though he was quick to emphasize that the hotel took great pride in its peaceful environment. When I pressed for details about room 847 specifically, his pause stretched long enough to make me wonder if the line had disconnected. Finally, he mentioned that the room had been renovated several times over the decades, most recently in the 1990s. The mirror, however, was original to the building, a piece crafted by local artisans when the hotel first opened its doors. That night, I couldn't bring myself to approach the mirror directly. Instead, I sat on the bed's edge, watching its surface from across the room. The reflection appeared normal from this distance, just the room's opposite wall and the bathroom doorway. But as my eyes grew heavy with exhaustion, I began to notice subtle inconsistencies. Shadows fell at slightly wrong angles. The pattern on the wallpaper seemed to move independently of any light source. And sometimes, just at the edge of perception, I caught glimpses of movement that didn't correspond to anything in the actual room. The figure appeared again during my morning routine, this time more clearly than before. He seemed younger than I'd initially thought, wearing clothing that belonged to a different era, a well-tailored suit with peaked lapels and a thin tie that spoke of the 1940s or 1950s. His face held an expression of intense concentration as he sorted through what appeared to be documents or letters. I tried speaking to the reflection, feeling foolish even as the words left my mouth. The figure gave no indication of hearing me, continuing his methodical examination of papers that existed only in the mirror's version of reality. When I reached out to touch the glass, my finger met the cool surface while the reflection showed my hand passing through empty air, the figure undisturbed by my presence. My final night at the Whitmore brought the most disturbing revelation yet. I'd positioned my phone to record continuously, hoping to catch some evidence of the phenomena I was experiencing. As I prepared for bed, I noticed the figure was no longer alone in the mirror's reflection. There were others now. Translucent shapes moving through the room like actors in a silent film. They interacted with furniture that wasn't there. Opened doors that led to different spaces and occasionally paused to examine objects that existed only in their reality. The mirror had become a window into a parallel version of the room, one populated by people from different times, all occupying the same space in their own distinct moments. The most unsettling discovery came when I reviewed the nights. The mirror had become a window into a parallel version of the room, one populated by people from different times, all occupying the same space in their own distinct moments. The most unsettling discovery came when I reviewed the night's footage. At first, everything appeared normal, an empty room, a figure tossing in bed, the curtains shifting with the breeze. But then, frame by frame, something began to emerge. At exactly 3:17 a.m., a soft flicker danced across the mirror's surface. Then another. As if a film projector had sputtered to life. The translucent figures began to appear. Slowly, as if being developed in a darkroom of time. One by one. A woman in a lace nightgown pacing with anxious energy. A child crawling beneath the writing desk. A man in military uniform staring blankly at the ceiling. They moved through the room in silence, overlapping each other's paths, each unaware of the others. And yet, the mirror reflected them all. And then, it happened. One of the figures, an old man with a cane, paused. Turned. Looked directly into the mirror. And then, as if aware of the camera, turned to face me. The footage blurred, pixelated for a split second, and then steadied. But now, the old man's eyes followed the lens with quiet, terrible recognition. His lips moved. I leaned in. No sound. But I could read his mouth. "You're not supposed to be here." The moment passed, and the figure resumed his spectral pacing. But my hands trembled as I clutched the phone. Because something else had changed. My own sleeping form in the bed, the version of me in the video, now had a figure sitting beside it. Watching. A dark silhouette with angular shoulders and a motionless presence. The same figure from before. And though I hadn't felt it at the time, he had been there. Inches from me. Watching. I paused the footage. Rewound. Frame by frame, I counted 3 separate moments, spread across the night, where the silhouette had approached the bed, leaned over, and stood motionless, as if listening to my dreams. Each time, when I examined the actual mirror in real life, it was clear. Empty. But through the recording, I was a sleeper in a room full of ghosts. I didn't sleep that final night. Instead, I sat in the chair across from the mirror with every light in the room turned on, my suitcase packed, and my phone gripped like a weapon. I waited for morning. For something to break the tension. But the hotel didn't let me go quietly. As dawn approached, a low hum filled the walls. Not mechanical. Not environmental. It was harmonic, like a resonance building in the bones of the building itself. The floorboards vibrated underfoot. The silver frame of the mirror began to shimmer, as if resisting the coming light. I stood. And the mirror's surface rippled. For the first time, one of the figures acknowledged me directly. A woman, young, dressed in a housemaid's uniform from decades ago, walked to the other side of the glass and stopped. Her hand lifted. Her palm pressed to the mirror. Without thinking, I lifted my own. Glass met skin. But then I felt it. Pressure. Not cold, hard resistance. But pressure, as if her hand was meeting mine not through glass, but through a membrane. Something pliable. Yielding. Something that could give. And for a second, the reflection changed. The room behind me, the real one, disappeared. Replaced by her room. The parallel version. It was brighter, warmer, with furnishings that hadn't aged. The wallpaper hadn't faded. The scent of lilacs drifted faintly to my nose. I saw my reflection again, only now, I was standing in her room. Not mine. A blink. Everything snapped back. I stumbled backward, breath shallow. The mirror was normal again. But I knew then, I had crossed a threshold. The Whitmore wasn't haunted. It was shared. Layered. A building worn thin between dimensions, where time folded in on itself like sheets on a made bed. I left that morning without checking out. Just walked out the lobby, into the new day, eyes on the sun. I haven't returned. I don't intend to. But sometimes, late at night, when I pass a mirror with the lights off, I see a glimmer of burgundy wallpaper. And behind me, just for a second, a man in a peaked lapel suit watching quietly. But sometimes, late at night, when I pass a mirror with the lights off, I see a glimmer of burgundy wallpaper. And behind me, just for a second, a man in a peaked lapel suit watching quietly. The following morning, I reviewed the latest footage. Once again, the video showed nothing unusual, just me moving through my evening routine in an empty room. But as I watched myself on the screen, I noticed something that made my hands shake so violently I nearly dropped the phone. In several shots, my own reflection in the recorded mirror was doing things I had no memory of doing. While the camera showed me brushing my teeth, my reflection appeared to be writing. When I sat on the bed reading, my mirror self stood at the window, looking out at something I couldn't see. Most disturbing of all, there were moments when my reflection turned to look directly at the camera, making eye contact with an intensity that I certainly hadn't felt at the time. The recording suggested that the mirror wasn't just showing me visions of other people. It was showing me a version of myself. One that existed independently, making choices and taking actions that my conscious mind knew nothing about. The implications crawled through my thoughts like insects, each one more terrifying than the last. As I packed my belongings that final morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being observed. Not by the figure in the old-fashioned suit, who had become almost familiar in his ghostly routine, but by myself. My own reflection. Every time I glanced at the mirror, I caught sight of myself turning away just a fraction of a second too late, as if my reflection had been watching me and was now pretending to match my movements. The checkout process passed in a blur of perfunctory pleasantries and credit card transactions. The morning clerk was different from the night staff, young, polite, and apparently unaware of the hotel's unusual reputation. When I mentioned that I'd experienced some strange phenomena in room 847, her smile became fixed and professional in the way that suggested this was not the first such conversation she'd had. She assured me that all guest concerns were taken seriously and offered to note my feedback in their system. But her eyes held a knowledge she wasn't sharing. I left with the uncomfortable certainty that my experiences had been neither unique nor unexpected. Now, weeks later, I find myself thinking about that mirror constantly. Not just during quiet moments when my mind might naturally drift, but at random times throughout the day, when I should be focused on work, conversation, life. The memory of my reflection's independent actions has left me questioning every mirror I encounter. In my bathroom at home, in store windows, in the rearview mirror of my car, I catch myself looking for signs that my reflection might be living its own life, making its own choices. Sometimes, just at the edge of perception, I think I see it happening again. A slight delay in my reflection's movements. A facial expression that doesn't match what I remember feeling. A sense that the person in the mirror is observing me, rather than simply mimicking. But whenever I look directly, everything appears normal. And I'm left to wonder, did the Whitmore Hotel permanently alter my relationship with my own reflection? Or am I slowly losing my grip on reality? The most troubling possibility is that both might be true. Perhaps the mirror in room 847 didn't show me hallucinations or supernatural phenomena. Perhaps it simply revealed what had always been there, a version of myself that exists independently of my conscious awareness. Living parallel experiences in the reflected world that surrounds us all. I've resisted the urge to return to the Whitmore. But the temptation grows stronger each day. Part of me needs to know if the figure in the old-fashioned suit is still there, still sorting through his mysterious documents. But a larger part fears what else I might discover. About the nature of reflection. About reality. And about the person who looks back at me from every mirrored surface. The business trip was a success. The Morrison account was secured. My presentations were well received. My supervisor praised my professional performance. But success feels meaningless when you're no longer certain that the person celebrating it is really you, or just another reflection, going through the motions of a life that might belong to someone else entirely. Some nights, I cover all the mirrors in my apartment before going to bed. Other nights, I leave one uncovered. Just to see. Some nights, I cover all the mirrors in my apartment before going to bed. Other nights, I leave one uncovered. Just to see. Sleep, when it comes, is shallow and filled with unease. Some nights I remain awake, staring into the dark shapes of my apartment, unwilling to risk catching sight of whatever my reflection might be doing while I'm unconscious. Other nights, I find myself standing before the mirror for hours. Searching. Waiting. Looking for any sign that the person gazing back is living independently of my intentions. But the question that haunts me most isn't whether what I experienced at the Whitmore was real or imagined. It's whether that distinction even matters anymore. When the experience has fundamentally changed how I understand the relationship between myself and the reflected world, when mirrors no longer merely mimic, but perhaps lead, the boundary between real and unreal begins to blur. The brass key turned with a grinding protest that echoed through the narrow alleyway behind my thrift store. 3 months. That's how long I'd owned second chances. 3 months of cataloging the previous owner's chaotic inventory. 3 months, and I'd barely touched the basement. The old man who sold me the place had been vague about what lay beneath the warped floorboards. He simply mentioned that storage space came with the property. But his roomy, glassy eyes had avoided mine when I asked about the basement's contents. I should have paid more attention to that avoidance. The wooden steps groaned under my weight as I descended into the musty dark. My flashlight carved a weak path through air thick with dust and age. Shadows pressed close to the beam. The basement was cluttered with disintegrating cardboard boxes, corners bowed by moisture and time, arranged in seemingly random piles. Cobwebs draped from the exposed ceiling joists like tattered funeral veils. And somewhere in that darkness, a slow drip of water tapped out a rhythm too precise to be natural. The basement felt wrong from the start. Not just neglected. Not just old. But inhabited, by something that didn't want to be named. The air down there moved strangely, stirring without a breeze. And it carried scents that should have been impossible in a sealed room: lilac perfume, pipe tobacco, the copper tang of old blood. My rational mind blamed imagination. Shadows and silence can distort reality. But reason was a poor shield against what settled around me in that place. That first night, after I locked up and walked the 6 blocks home, I heard it. Furniture being dragged. The slow, deliberate scrape of wood against concrete. I froze on the sidewalk, key halfway to my door, listening. The sound came from beneath the building. From my basement. I rushed back, unlocked the store, and descended into the dark with my flashlight. But everything was as it had been. Boxes undisturbed. No tracks in the dust. Nothing moved. I told myself it was just an old building settling. But then it happened again. And again. Every night at 9:30, for exactly 17 minutes, the sounds began. Dragging. Then silence. Then 3 deliberate knocks. Sometimes, there were voices. Urgent. Muffled. Always just beyond understanding. More than one speaker. Arguing, maybe. Or, pleading. I set up motion-activated cameras. The footage showed nothing. Just shadows and still air. But the audio captured everything. The dragging. The knocks. The distant, frantic whispers. I wasn't imagining it. 2 weeks after the cameras were installed, I found something that hadn't been there before. A table. Positioned in the far corner of the basement. I knew that corner had been empty. I had cleaned there myself. But now, there it stood, an old oak table with turned legs, worn with age. Atop it, a music box. Mahogany, with mother-of-pearl inlays. The kind of thing you might find in an estate sale or a forgotten attic. It was closed. I touched it. The wood felt warm. And from somewhere deep inside the box, I swore I heard a whisper. My fingers recoiled. I haven't opened it yet. But each night, as 9:30 draws near, I find myself at the top of the basement stairs, listening. Because now the sounds have changed. They no longer come from within the basement. They come from the other side of the music box. And they're calling my name. Because now the sounds have changed. They no longer come from within the basement. They come from the other side of the music box. And they're calling my name. Hands. Attached to its base, a yellowed price tag written in careful cursive. Mrs. Eleanor Vance. October 15, 1987. I'd opened Second Chances on March 3, 2023. The building had supposedly been vacant for over a decade before my purchase. The handwriting on the tag was unmistakably feminine. Each letter formed with the precise care of someone educated in an era when penmanship mattered. The paper felt authentically aged, its edges browned and brittle, as if it had waited 36 years to be found. When I lifted the music box, its weight seemed wrong. Too heavy for its size, as if filled with something denser than expected. I didn't wind it. Something in its presence warned against activation. A primitive instinct, one that knew stillness could be dangerous. Instead, I photographed the tag. Proof, perhaps, of the impossible. The next morning, the table was empty. The music box gone. But the table had moved, closer to the stairs. By maybe 3 feet. The concrete floor showed no scuff marks, no scratches, no drag lines. And yet, I was certain. It had shifted. More items began appearing. A leather-bound journal filled with entries dated 1962. Price, 75 cents. Seller, Robert Chen. A ceramic vase tagged for $2. Dated 1994. Seller, the Henderson Estate. Each carried that same precise cursive. Those impossible dates. Names of people who, according to city records, should have never set foot in my shop. I researched every one of them. Eleanor Vance died in a car accident on October 20, 1987, 5 days after the music box was allegedly sold. Robert Chen had owned a bookstore just 3 blocks away. He died of a heart attack in 1965. The Henderson Estate appeared in an article from 1994, detailing their final public auction, 2 months before the date on the vase. All deceased. All linked to these objects. Objects that shouldn't exist. The basement sounds grew more complex. Cash register chimes. Paper bags rustling. Footsteps moving above me when the store was locked and empty. The voices became clearer. Still distorted. Still faint. But fragments now reached me. He needs to know. He won't understand. Spoken with concern. As if I was being watched and discussed. Sleep grew rare. I began hearing the store's brass key turning in the dead of night. The creak of the basement door. The whisper of conversation from a place 6 blocks away. Impossible. Yet I heard it. The cameras showed my descent into obsession. Me. Watching. Talking to the air. Pleading with silence. My beard thickened. My clothes became wrinkled. My eyes, hollowed. But the objects kept coming. A pocket watch dated 1973. A hand-knitted scarf from 1981. A silver locket marked 1996. Each tagged with that same feminine hand. Each linked to someone who died shortly after their recorded purchase. The basement had become a museum of final moments. A showroom of last transactions from people who never walked through my front door. I began staying late. Sitting in the basement's dark. Hoping to catch the moment these things arrived. The presence grew stronger. Not hostile, but observant. Heavy. Sometimes I felt if I turned quickly enough, I'd see them. But quick was never fast enough. But quick movements only revealed empty spaces and dancing shadows. The breakthrough came on a Thursday night in October. I'd been dozing in my basement chair when the dragging sounds began with unusual intensity. This time, however, they were accompanied by a sound I'd never heard before. The soft whisper of voices speaking directly above me, their words finally clear enough to understand. "He's listening," said a woman's voice, cultured and concerned. "He knows we're here." "The boy needs to understand," replied a man with a slight accent I couldn't place. "This place, it remembers everything." "But will understanding help him, or destroy him?" asked a third voice, younger than the others. "Some knowledge comes with a price." I sat frozen in my chair, afraid that any movement would break whatever spell allowed me to hear them clearly. The voices seemed to emanate from the floor above, yet I knew the store was empty. My cameras would show nothing but vacant space, just as they always did. "Show him," the woman said finally. "Show him what this place really is." The dragging sounds resumed with renewed vigor, but this time I understood their purpose. They weren't random movements, but deliberate arrangement. The careful positioning of inventory according to some system I'd been too blind to perceive. The voices faded as the sounds reached a crescendo, replaced by a silence so complete it seemed to press against my eardrums. When the noise stopped, I found myself standing in a different basement. The walls had been painted a warm yellow, now faded, but still welcoming. Fluorescent fixtures provided steady illumination, revealing rows of neatly organized shelves lined with carefully arranged merchandise. Price tags hung from every item, all written in that familiar careful script, all dated with impossible precision. The concrete floor had been covered with a thin carpet, worn but clean. And the air smelled of furniture polish and fresh coffee, rather than dust and decay. This was second chances as it had never been, yet somehow always was. I walked among the shelves in a trance, recognizing items I'd found and lost, seeing them in their proper context as part of a thriving business that transcended the normal boundaries of existence. The music box sat on a display table, its lid open to reveal a tiny dancing figure caught mid-pirouette. The journal lay open to a page filled with Robert Chen's careful observations about his customers' preferences. The ceramic vase held fresh flowers that released a scent of impossible spring. At the back of this transformed space, behind a curtain I hadn't noticed before, I found them. They sat around a small table, playing cards by lamplight, their faces turned toward me with expressions of infinite patience. Mrs. Eleanor Vance looked exactly as she had in her newspaper obituary photo, her silver hair perfectly arranged, her kind eyes bright with intelligence. Robert Chen smiled around the pipe clenched between his teeth, cards held loosely in hands that seemed more substantial than shadow. The third figure, a young man I didn't recognize, but whose face seemed familiar, gestured toward an empty chair. "Welcome to the real second chances," Mrs. Vance said, her voice carrying the same cultured tones I'd heard through the ceiling. "We've been waiting for you to understand." I wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but found my voice trapped somewhere between wonder and terror. The young man seemed to sense my paralysis and leaned forward with an encouraging smile. "This place exists between moments," he explained, his words carrying the weight of absolute truth. "Between transaction and memory. Between ownership and loss. We're not ghosts, exactly. We're the echo of every meaningful exchange that ever took place here. But the store was never here before I bought it," I managed to whisper. Robert Chen chuckled softly, a sound like pages turning in a well-loved book. "Places like this don't follow ordinary rules of time and space. We've been conducting business here since the first person sold something precious to someone who needed it." "You didn't buy a building," Mrs. Vance said. "You inherited a responsibility." She reached across the table and touched my hand. Her fingers felt warm, completely solid, more real than anything I'd touched in weeks. "You didn't buy a building," Mrs. Vance said. You inherited a responsibility. She reached across the table and touched my hand. Her fingers felt warm, completely solid, more real than anything I'd touched in weeks. The warmth of her hand lingered longer than it should have. It wasn't just touch, it was transfer. Like something unseen passed from her into me. The room flickered. Only for a moment. Then the curtain behind them shifted again, revealing a fourth figure I hadn't noticed before, an old man in a threadbare vest, standing before a high desk with a massive leather-bound ledger. He dipped his pen in ink and began writing, his face hidden by the brim of a faded bowler hat. "What's he doing?" I asked. "He's recording your arrival," Robert Chen replied, not even glancing back. "Every new custodian has a page. Your name will sit beside the date and time you truly saw this place." "My page?" Mrs. Vance gave a nod. "Second Chances doesn't keep receipts. It keeps memories. Every exchange, every soul that's passed through here, they're all written. The ledger remembers what people forget." The young man pushed a mug of something warm toward me. "We can help you manage the store. But we can't protect you from it." That chilled me more than the air. "But what is the store?" I asked. "Is it haunted? Alive?" Mrs. Vance smiled, a sorrowful curve of lips. "Not alive. Not dead either. Think of it as conscious. Second Chances exists at the intersection of endings. When people let go of something, or someone, it comes here, waiting to be remembered. Waiting to finish its story." I sipped from the mug. Cinnamon, apples. A memory I couldn't place. "We're the guides," said the young man. "But the real work is yours." I sat back. "What work?" Robert Chen stood and opened a narrow drawer built into the table. He pulled out a single brass key, different from the one I'd used to open the storefront. Older. Simpler. Worn smooth by countless hands. He placed it in front of me. "The back room," he said. "You've never seen it because you weren't meant to. Until now." I stared at the key. Mrs. Vance placed her hand gently over mine again. "The back room is where the unresolved items wait. The ones too burdened with memory to appear on shelves." "Why me?" I asked. "Why did the store choose me?" No one answered at first. The silence stretched long enough for the old man at the ledger to close the book with a dull, final thud. Then the young man spoke again. "Because you listened." I took the key. "The items you've been finding," Mrs. Vance continued softly, "they're not just inventory. They're connections. Bridges between what was, and what might be. Each one represents someone's final act of hope. Their belief that their treasures would find new homes with people who'd appreciate them." The basement around us began to shift and fade. The warm lighting dimmed. The soft carpet underfoot receded, replaced by cool concrete once again. The three figures at the table wavered like heat mirages, their forms growing translucent. "Remember," the young man called as they vanished. "This place serves those who need second chances. That includes you." Then they were gone. I sat alone in the basement, surrounded by cobwebbed boxes and quiet shadows. The warmth of Mrs. Vance's touch still lingered on my hand, and in the silence, I thought I heard, faint and distant, the soft ring of a cash register bell. The next morning, every item I'd ever photographed had returned. Neatly arranged on polished wood shelves that hadn't existed the day before. Their tags remained the same, those precise dates and looping cursive taunting the logic of time. But now, I understood their purpose. I opened Second Chances with a purpose I'd never known before. My first customer that day was an elderly man searching for a gift. His late wife's birthday, he said. He wasn't sure what he was hoping to find, only that he felt drawn to the store. I led him to Mrs. Vance's music box. When I wound it, the tiny dancer twirled to a melody that drew tears from his eyes. "She loved this song," he whispered. "How did you know?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Some inventories transcend time. The basement still whispers at night. The dragging sounds, the murmured conversations, the delicate work of unseen curators preparing what someone, somewhere, will soon need. I don't fear the noise anymore. It's the sound of memory being organized. Of grief being acknowledged. Of lives quietly reconnecting across the silent threads of time. Sometimes, in the early hours before sunrise, I descend to the basement and find the table set for 4. A chair left empty. For me. Because I finally understand. This isn't just a store. It's a sanctuary. A threshold. And some stores don't just sell things. They sell the possibility of starting again. One impossible transaction at a time. The rental agreement still lay on my kitchen counter, its edges curling slightly in the humid air that seemed to permeate every corner of this place. 3 months ago, signing that lease had felt like salvation. A cheap 2-story house in Millbrook Heights, far enough from downtown to stretch my unemployment benefits, close enough to civilization that I wouldn't completely lose my mind. The realtor had been eager, perhaps too eager, to close the deal quickly. The previous tenant had left suddenly, she'd explained, with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I should have asked more questions. The first week passed uneventfully. I unpacked boxes, set up my mattress in the upstairs bedroom, and arranged my bookshelves beneath the sloped ceiling. The upper floor served as my entire living space, bedroom, kitchenette, and a cramped sitting area that overlooked overgrown lots and rusting chain-link fences. The ground floor remained locked, as stipulated in the lease. Storage only, the landlord had called it. Though the heavy deadbolt on the inside of the basement door felt ominously out of place for mere storage. On the 3rd night, I heard footsteps. Not above me, there was no floor above mine. Below. Deliberate. Measured. Pacing slowly across the boards beneath my bed. I froze, listening. Counted each heavy step as it moved beneath the floor, crossed beneath the hallway, then disappeared. The house grew still again. But something had shifted. I tried to convince myself it was plumbing. Or old wood settling. But old houses don't pace. They creak, they moan, they don't wander. I waited until morning to test the basement door. The deadbolt still held fast. But now, etched into the wooden surface where I'd never seen it before, was a series of small gouges, 4 deep parallel scratches, as if something with claws had tried to open it from the other side. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the dark living room, staring at the basement door like it might open at any second. My ears strained to detect movement, but the house remained maddeningly silent, as if it were waiting for me to make the next move. At 3:17 a.m., the power went out. The light bulbs dimmed with a sigh and then died. The clock on the microwave blinked once and went black. A moment later, a soft sound rose from beneath the floorboards, a faint dragging noise, like a bag of stones being pulled slowly across concrete. It was coming from the basement. I turned on my phone's flashlight and crept down the hallway. The beam shook in my hand, casting jittery shadows that danced across the peeling wallpaper. As I approached the basement door, I noticed something new. The deadbolt was unlocked. Not turned, unlocked. The metal handle was cold and damp in my hand as I pushed the door open. The air that rushed up from below smelled of mildew, rust, and something faintly sweet, like rotting fruit left too long in the sun. I aimed the flashlight downward. The stairs descended into blackness. I couldn't see the bottom. But something waited there. Watching. I didn't go down that night. I closed the door and pushed the heaviest piece of furniture I owned against it, a wobbly bookcase that offered little in the way of real protection. Then I sat with my back to the wall, flashlight clutched in white-knuckled hands, and waited for the sun to rise. When morning came, everything seemed normal. Power returned. The lights worked. The microwave blinked the wrong time. The air smelled like dust and old wood again. The basement door was still closed. The scratches on the surface remained. But the deadbolt was locked. And I hadn't touched it. Midnight came, and with it, exhaustion. Despite my best efforts to remain vigilant, my eyelids drooped and my grip on the bat slackened. I drifted into uneasy sleep, the kind that hovers at the threshold of dreams and waking. The sound of metal clattering jolted me awake. The fishing line trap I'd rigged, crude but effective, was rattling in the stairwell. Something was coming up the stairs. I jumped from the chair, heart slamming in my chest, and grabbed the bat. The aluminum cans tumbled across the wooden floor below, bouncing like startled insects. The footsteps followed, slow, deliberate, echoing up the narrow staircase. No attempt at stealth. Whoever, or whatever, it was, it wanted me to hear. "Who's there?" I called, my voice cracking with fear I could no longer mask. The footsteps stopped. Silence swelled in the stairwell, thick as oil. I stood at the top, gripping the bat with both hands, breath shallow and erratic. Then I heard it, my own voice, calling from the darkness below. "Who's there?" Same words. Same tone. Same broken cadence. It was me. My voice. From the ground floor. I dropped to my knees shaking against the floorboards, trying to make sense of the impossible. The voice below called again. "Who's there?" This time, it was followed by movement, shuffling steps, the creak of floorboards, the subtle rhythm of pacing I'd come to recognize all too well. For weeks, I had walked these same patterns in anxiety, in fear, in hopeless isolation. And now, someone else was doing the same. Another me. I crawled to the edge of the stairs, heart in my throat, and peered into the blackness. The ground floor was hidden, swallowed by shadow. But I could hear it all, footsteps pacing in mimicry of my own habits, muttered questions echoing ones I'd asked aloud in my worst moments. It wasn't a haunting, not in the traditional sense. It was something far more disorienting. A convergence. A collision of selves. A parallel existence stitched together by an unknowable force, a version of me, below, living my exact life with subtle, chilling deviations. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to slow my breathing. The lease. The former tenant who vanished. The realtor's carefully rehearsed smile. The deadbolt meant not to keep someone out, but something in. This wasn't a one-time event. It was systemic. As I write this now, I can hear him, my other self, pacing below. Sometimes muttering, sometimes sobbing. And sometimes, talking to someone else. A second voice has joined him, familiar, yet distorted. Like mine through a haze of anger or despair. I think it's me too. Another version. Another echo. How many of us are trapped here? Stacked like dusty records in a house that doesn't recognize linear time? I've pushed furniture against the basement door. Not because I believe it will hold, but because it gives me the illusion of agency. It's getting worse. In the stillest hours before sunrise, I now hear other voices, not from below, but from above. Soft. Curious. Repeating words I've whispered into the dark. How many floors does this house truly have? The lease still binds me for 11 more months. And even if I could leave, I'm no longer certain that the world outside would be any different. I've begun to suspect that this place doesn't trap you physically. It copies you. Fragments you. Installs you in another layer of its impossible blueprint. Tomorrow, I'll try something new. I'll speak to them. To the man below. And to the man above, if he answers. If we can all hear each other, maybe we can break the cycle. Or maybe we'll simply learn how deep this house goes. But tonight, I sit by the window. Bat in hand. Laptop open. And I hear my own voice, calling softly up the stairs. Who's there? The first time it happened, I thought it was a drunk neighbor hitting the wrong button. The intercom crackled at 3:17 a.m., pulling me from deep sleep like a hook behind the eyes. A harsh, sandpaper voice hissed through the static. No name. No apartment number. Just a low, persistent request. Can I come up? It echoed in my skull long after the line went dead. I padded across the hardwood in my underwear, staring at the dim intercom panel. Blank. No ID. No caller. I pressed the reply button, static. Then, nothing. I called down to the front desk. Martinez, the night guard, answered on the second ring. His voice was groggy but calm. No one's come in, sir. Lobby's quiet. Cameras would have caught it. Something in his tone struck me. Not confusion, resignation. As if this wasn't the first time someone had asked. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, watching the faint shadows from passing cars slide across my ceiling, the building creaking like a ship at sea. Every sound seemed magnified, charged with intent. When the call came again exactly 24 hours later, I was ready. I sat beside the intercom at 3:15 a.m., my phone already dialing Martinez's number. The same voice. A little clearer now. Can I come up? Not a question. Not really. A ritual. Martinez picked up as soon as I called. No one's here. I promise, he said again. But his voice held something else this time, careful neutrality, like someone reciting a script. When I asked if this had happened before, the pause was too long. Sometimes, the system acts weird, he said finally. Old wiring. Ghost signals. Wires cross. But his voice was tightening, his words chosen too precisely. He knew something. Or suspected. The third night, I waited again. The air in my apartment felt different, thin, stretched. Like the space itself had expanded just beyond what my eyes could verify. The couch seemed farther from the wall. The shadows deeper. The clocks louder. 3:17 struck. The voice returned. Same request. But this time, there was something behind it. Not just urgency. Not even malice. But presence. Like the speaker wasn't alone. I demanded answers. The response? Silence. But not the empty kind. Listening silence. The kind that fills a room like smoke. Watching. Breathing. Waiting. I felt it then, attention, pressing through the speaker, brushing across my skin like cold fingertips. Martinez seemed genuinely confused when I called. He swore no one had come through the doors. No buzz on the console. The only person who'd entered was Mrs. Chen from 4B after her hospital shift. I asked about the security footage. He hesitated. Sensors are acting up. Cameras flicker. Might have missed it. He was lying. Or afraid. Or both. By the fourth night, I had a theory. A rational one. Hackers. Pranksters. Someone exploiting the building system, accessing the intercom remotely. I'd read about these things. Smart buildings weren't as secure as advertised. It was the most plausible answer. I even called a friend in IT, asked questions without revealing too much. He mentioned voice emulation software, signal spoofing, internal loopbacks in aging circuits. It all almost made sense. Until the fifth night. That night, the voice didn't speak. Instead, I heard footsteps. Not in the hallway. Not on my floor. Inside the walls. Behind the drywall. Between the studs. A slow shuffling sound, like someone dragging themselves sideways through a crawlspace. Following the plumbing or the old heating ducts. Moving up. Toward me. Almost immediate, his expression shuddered, eyes flicking toward the lobby cameras as if afraid they might overhear. "You shouldn't have answered," he said quietly, barely above a whisper. "I thought it was a prank," I replied. Martinez shook his head. "It's never a prank. Not at this place." He hesitated, clearly wrestling with himself, before finally leaning in. "You're not the first to get the 317 call," he said. "And you won't be the last." I stared at him, waiting, but he offered no further clarification. "Only this. If it stops calling, that's when you should worry. That means it's no longer asking permission." That night, I sat in total darkness. No lights. No distractions. Just me. The intercom. And the clock. 3:17 a.m. The crackle was different this time, thicker. Like the line itself was degrading, fraying under the weight of whatever was trying to push through. The voice came again. My voice. Only not quite. "Can I come up?" But it wasn't a question anymore. It was a demand draped in patience. A ritual dressed in civility. And this time, it wasn't just one voice. There were others behind it. Whispering. Repeating the phrase over and over again like a chant. "Let me in. Let me in. Let me in." I didn't answer. I unplugged the intercom. Yanked the wire straight from the wall. The chanting didn't stop. It came from the speaker even without power. I tried to leave. Packed a duffel, locked the door, and made for the elevator. Pressed the button with shaking fingers. The doors slid open, and I hesitated. There was no one inside, but the panel was wrong. There was a new button I'd never seen before. B2. My building doesn't have a B2. Just lobby, basement, and 11 floors. The light behind the B2 button flickered, dim and red, like a dying ember. I didn't press it. I stepped back. Let the doors close. The next morning, the button was gone. I asked Martinez about it. He stared at me with hollow eyes. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked. I didn't reply. He nodded. "Don't press it. No matter what you hear." The far wall, gripping the edge of my kitchen counter like it might anchor me in place, but nothing could ground me against the feeling that I was no longer alone, not in the comforting way of shared company, but in the invasive, consuming way of something alien moving beneath your skin. Drawers opened. Slowly. Deliberately. Not with force, but with the unsettling grace of familiarity being claimed. The bathroom door creaked open behind me though I hadn't moved. My laptop screen flickered to life without being touched, displaying nothing but a pitch-black window, then a slow-loading image, my apartment, from a corner I didn't recognize. As if I were being watched from within a room I didn't know existed. Then the image blinked. And I was standing there, in the frame. But I hadn't moved. In the days that followed, things changed rapidly. Objects weren't just moved anymore, they were replaced. I'd wake to find subtle, wrong versions of my possessions. Books with the same titles but different endings. Clothes that fit, but were never mine. A coffee mug printed with a photo I'd never taken, but featuring my face smiling beside people I didn't know. And the reflection in the hallway mirror began to linger. A second too long. Blinking out of sync. Smiling when I didn't. I tried to leave again, booked a hotel, packed light, but when I reached the front doors of the building, they refused to open. Not locked. Not jammed. Just resistant. Martinez met me in the lobby and gave a small shake of his head, eyes wide with dread. "You waited too long," he whispered. "It doesn't let go once it knows you're listening." That night, the tapping returned, but not on the windows or the mirror. From inside the walls. Rhythmic. Intentional. Morse code, perhaps? When I placed my ear against the drywall, I heard the breathing again. But now it matched mine exactly. And somewhere deep within the walls, I heard my own voice once more. Only this time, it was pleading. "You have to switch back. Please. It's not done yet." The wood, heart thudding against bone, trying to discern if someone still waited on the other side. Nothing. No footsteps retreating, no shifting weight, no hushed whispers or breath. Just the door. And that silence. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Sleep deprivation, stress, the ghostly acoustics of old student housing. Maybe the pipes again. Maybe the wind. But as I turned away, hands still hovering near the knob, I saw it. The shadow beneath the door. It hadn't been there before. Narrow and tall, too still to be cast by anything moving naturally. It stood precisely in the center, immobile and unwavering. A human shape without a human presence. As if something stood just inches away, knowing I was watching, waiting for permission to enter. Then the doorknob began to turn. Not a jiggle. Not a knock. A turn, slow, deliberate, patient. Only the chain lock I'd installed the first week of term stopped it from opening entirely. Metal stretched against metal with a soft clink. A pause. And then. A whisper. Not words. Not even sound, exactly. A vibration more than anything else. Felt in the spine. Heard in the bones. It carried a shape, a message, even if no language accompanied it. An invitation. Or a warning. Maybe both. I staggered backward. The laptop still blinked on the desk, the cursor pulsing like a heart. My half-written anthropology report suddenly felt absurdly irrelevant. And on the floor just beneath the doorframe, something had been slid under. A page. Torn. Yellowed at the edges. Handwritten text in ink so old it had faded to brown. It read, "Do not open unless you intend to take their place." Like it belonged to me. Something else had claimed it. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the door as if it might open of its own accord, or worse, reveal something that had been hiding just behind it all along. The air in the attic had changed, grown heavier, charged with an invisible pressure that made it hard to breathe. My lungs strained with every shallow inhale, and my skin prickled with cold sweat that refused to dry. Then the laptop, closed but still alive, let out a soft ping. A notification. My hand hovered above it, hesitant. But curiosity, that cruel betrayer, forced me to lift the lid. The screen glowed faintly in the dim room. A single sentence blinked at the center of the screen in that same unfamiliar, spidery font. "We're almost finished learning you." I slammed it shut again, this time with enough force to knock it off the desk. It clattered to the floor with a dull, final thud. My name whispered again, this time audibly, unmistakably, from the corner of the ceiling where the plaster had begun to crack. The voice didn't echo like it came from a human throat. It was inside the walls, vibrating in the bones of the house, as if the structure itself had become vocal. As if the house was speaking. And then, a new sound. Breathing. Not mine. Close. Slow. Inhale. Exhale. A sound too deep for any of my housemates. Too steady. Too old. It came from beneath the floorboards, from inside the walls, from behind the sealed door. Everywhere. I grabbed the only thing within reach, a wooden chair, and hurled it at the door. It splintered against the frame with a crash, but the door remained untouched. Unmoved. The house itself groaned in response, a low vibration like the clearing of a throat. Then silence. Not peace. Pause. The kind of silence that happens before something begins. Behind me, the papers on my desk began to lift, not blown by wind, but pulled, as if gravity had shifted. The blanket slipped off the chair. The books I'd stacked haphazardly against the wall began to tilt. And then the light bulb flickered. Once. Twice. And went out. Total darkness swallowed the attic. I didn't scream, I couldn't. My throat clenched as if something had reached through the dark and seized it in one invisible hand. I stood perfectly still, unsure if I was holding my breath or if something else had taken it from me. Then, click. A sound behind me. Not the lamp. Not the laptop. Something softer, wetter. Like a mouth forming words in the dark. Then came the whisper. Not from a single direction, but from every plank, beam, and nail in the room. We know you now. I turned, slowly, body locked in its own glacial panic. Shapes moved in the pitch black. They didn't glow, they absorbed what little ambient light remained. Figures. Tall. Thin. Elongated like shadows stretched too far. And then, a voice, not mine, but wearing my voice like a borrowed mask. You can rest now. We'll take it from here. My hand fumbled along the desk for anything to defend myself. Fingers closed around a pen. Pathetic. But it gave me something solid to hold onto as the darkness around me grew tighter, like the attic itself was inhaling. Then, a shift. The sound of footsteps on the roof. Light, careful, deliberate. Followed by another sound, like nails tapping glass. The dormer window. It shuddered once. Twice. And then it opened slowly, pushed inward by hands I couldn't see. Rain swept in, slicing cold lines down my cheeks. But I couldn't feel relief, because something had entered with it. Something that had been waiting outside, learning, mimicking. The attic wasn't just haunted. It was hollowed. Turned inside out by something that wanted more than presence, it wanted identity. Mine. I backed into the farthest corner. Shadows pressed forward like a tide. I screamed this time, a hoarse, broken thing. But my voice was drowned out. By my voice. Stronger. Calmer. Speaking from somewhere in the dark. Shoo. Go to sleep. We have your name now. The last thing I saw before the light returned was my reflection in the laptop screen. Only, it blinked. And I hadn't. It started with an odd entry in the guest book. Not digital. Not online. A real one, leather-bound, thick, and cracked from years of handling. The kind you'd expect to find in an old inn that hadn't updated its front desk since the 70s. I'd been hired as the night manager at the old Briar Hollow Lodge, a remote mountain hotel with 12 rooms and no recent website. The owner, a pale man named Mr. Danton, had interviewed me over the phone and hired me the same evening, citing an urgent need for someone who could work nights and respect the quiet. The pay was decent. The job simple. Sit at the front desk. Monitor the cameras. Handle late check-ins, if any. And, above all, record the names of guests. The ledger sat open when I arrived on my first shift. Room numbers were listed in careful, looping handwriting, each line signed by someone who had once slept there. The last entry had been made 3 years ago. After that, blank pages. I figured they'd switched to digital bookings. But when I asked Mr. Danton about the computer system, he looked at me strangely. There is no system. If someone checks in, write their name. It felt archaic. But I shrugged. Old places have their rituals. That first night, nothing happened. The second, the storm came. Winds howled against the windows. Pines swayed like nervous dancers in the dark. At midnight, the front doors creaked open, by wind, I assumed, and I walked over to close them. But someone was standing just outside. A woman. Drenched. Pale. Her eyes hollow. No luggage. "I'd like a room," she said. Her voice flat, as if spoken through water. I handed her a key to room 3. Asked for a name. She hesitated. Then reached for the ledger and signed, slowly. Eloise Vellum. The moment her pen left the paper, the ink shimmered. Just faintly. Like heat rising off asphalt. Then it stilled. She took the key. Walked upstairs without a word. I stared at her signature. And blinked. Because I'd seen that name before. In the very first entry of the book. Eloise Vellum. Room 3. June 4, 1978. I flipped back to that page. Same name. Same room. Same handwriting. I sat back, cold blooming in my stomach. The entry was over 40 years old. But it had been written in the exact same looping, careful script. That first night, sleep did not come easily. The fire burned low, then died entirely, despite the logs I'd fed it. The room grew cold, not mountain cold, but something deeper, like the chill of an underground vault sealed for too long. I lay on the couch wrapped in 2 blankets, listening. To what, I wasn't sure. The wind? No. It was too rhythmic. Thud, scratch, scratch, pause. Thud, scratch, scratch, pause. Coming from behind the north-facing wall. At 2:47 a.m., I sat bolt upright. The sound had changed, closer now. Not behind the wall, but within it, like something crawling just beneath the surface of the wood. I stood, heart pounding against my ribs like fists on a locked door. Pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing. Until I heard it. A breath. Not mine. Wet, shallow, and ragged. As though lungs unused to air were learning how to inhale again. I jerked back. The cabin seemed to exhale with me. By morning, the markings on the wall had changed. I could swear it. Their angles seemed sharper. More aligned. Like they had adjusted themselves after watching me. The spiral pattern now ended exactly where my head had rested on the pillow. That afternoon, I tried to call Marcus. No signal. I walked half a mile down the dirt road, phone held high, waving it like a white flag. Still nothing. When I returned to the cabin, the front door was ajar. I had locked it. I was sure of it. Inside, everything appeared untouched. Except the couch. It had been moved, dragged again to face the north wall. The same position it had been in when I arrived. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor beside the fireplace, an axe within arm's reach, listening as the wind outside built into a mournful howl. Around 3 a.m., I began to hear chanting. Not loud. Just beneath the level of awareness. Voices in unison, humming or whispering from somewhere deep in the wood. The north wall creaked. Its surface bulged slightly outward, like something behind it had pressed too hard against the boards. I backed into the kitchen, nearly knocking over a kettle. The markings glowed. Faintly. A reddish shimmer, like embers in dying ash. And then, the house breathed again. Deeper this time. Slower. As if it were waking up. Or becoming aware. The final straw came the following morning, when I found the duffel bag I'd packed still zipped exactly as I'd left it, but now filled with someone else's clothes. None of them were mine. They smelled of cedar, dust, and something more primal. Wet earth. Decay. A folded note sat atop the pile. Typed. Not handwritten. We knew you'd come. You were expected. The walls remember. The house accepts. I left the cabin that afternoon with nothing but the clothes on my back. Or tried to. Because when I reached the road, it was gone. Not the road itself, but the landmarks. The bent tree. The rock outcrop shaped like a horseshoe. Even the tracks from my own boots had vanished. Everything looked the same in every direction. The same trees. The same snow-dusted underbrush. The same creeping feeling that I was being watched. I returned to the cabin. Its door stood open. Inside, the furniture was once again arranged around the north wall. And this time, the couch was no longer empty. A figure sat there, facing away. Its head turned slightly as I stepped over the threshold. But when I looked, there was nothing. Only cushions, sunken with the shape of someone who had just been there. The laptop I hadn't brought beeped from the kitchen counter. Its screen glowed. A document open. My name at the top. Beneath it, a single line typed in that same foreign serif font. The cabin is not haunted. It is alive. And it's learning to speak. The janitor found her first. He didn't scream. He just dropped his mop, turned, and walked out the front doors of the museum without a word. When security reviewed the footage, he could be seen exiting the building, his face blank, eyes glassy. He hasn't spoken a word since. They found her just before opening, seated on one of the benches in the east wing. Dressed neatly, as if she had come to attend a lecture or a concert. Her hands were folded politely in her lap. Her face was frozen in a half-smile, like she had just seen something that struck her as quietly amusing. But she was completely, utterly still. No breath fogged the cool morning air. No blink disturbed the glassy sheen of her eyes. The coroner called it catatonia.